we're going to show you exactly how things happen in the world of NASA. And we're going to be looking specifically at the very unusual characteristics of these photographs. We're going to start right here with the first image of the flag. We're going to go through this sequence down here. Here are, of course, the images of the wet flag right in here. You're going to see that the ground is very, very wet. You can even see it just in the icons on these. They go out on their first EVA and they do this little traverse out, and then they come back. And we're going to come down to here. This is when they're coming back and approaching. We're going to look at all of these images here close in detail up to this different flag. You're going to see that the shadow lengths have dramatically changed. We're going to show you that it's not even the same flag. Now, if they were on the lunar surface and they went for an EVA, who stayed at the LEM and changed the flag out? And that's what we're going to be focusing on. We're going to start right here with these nice little images, but then we're going to come in and we're going to show these guys standing, and of course with the red stripes on. This is Cernan with the red stripes. We want to clarify who these individuals are.
Yeah, as a commander
that are looking at there. And Jack Smith, of course, does not have a red stripe on his suit anywhere. First of all, we're going to take a look at the ground. We're going to see that it's very, very wet. We're going to show you that all of the footprints are very, very defined in here. We're going to show you just how well these imprints are. Here's the tire tracks in here, how defined they are in there. I'm going to blow this up and we're going to show you the length of the shadow. You can see right here, the bell housing actually has sunlight striking it underneath the bell housing. The shadow length goes right off the image, the length of the shadow. The shadow of the astronaut is about twice his body length, so it's about 12 feet long. We're going to show you here just how defined these footprints are. The ground is very, very wet on here. Then we're going to come back and we're going to have a look at this flag. And we're going to show you up close that this is not the same flag as when they return from their EVA.
I'd like to make one comment on that flag. You can still see the moisture stripes going down that blue part of it. So it's still damp.
But you can see even in these photographs, without blowing it up, the ground is very, very damp here. And here they come back to the flag. Of course, they do a nice little version with the earth up there. And now we're going to have a look at how the ground is. Right up nice and close. This is a nice photograph. The footprints are not defined. You can hardly get any definition in the tire tracks whatsoever. This is when they return from their EVA. The ground is very much drier. And then we're going to come back and look at the shadow length on the LEM. In the other photograph, it went right off the page. I mean, it has shortened up dramatically. There's the bell housing right there. It's no longer lit.
Ah, that's interesting. It should be lit.
The number of degrees that it would happen when they went out on this EVA, even if they were out for 5 or 6 hours on that EVA, wouldn't change that much. But you see the shadow lengths have changed. The ground is very much drier. And now we're going to get in and we're going to have a look right at this flag right here. When these flags were folded up, they're folded exactly in the same manner for storage. It's not an official fold the way they're folded up, because we've looked at what ceremonial folding of the flags are for funerals and for display. These are just folded up for storage. They're folded exactly the same way, except when they started with one flag, it was one side up and the other flag is up the other way. Everything on the folds are exactly reversed. So when you have this high line here coming down, it's now a crease the other way. When you have this high line here, it's now a crease the other way. You got to realize both of these flags are shot from the same side, the same direction, and the LEM is directly behind it. On the one on the right is the first, before they went on the EVA, is the one on the right is out there, and when they come back, This is the flag that's in place. You can see all the differences in how it's rolled out here, much higher crinkle rolls. The stars here are very, very visible here, and they're not here because the fold is the exact opposite. That crease line there is that crease line there in the exact reverse. This depression here is that the part that is raised. Everything is reversed.
Look at the stars. Now, this might just be me, but I see polka dots right in the center of the stars on this flag on the right-hand side. It looks like there's a tiny little blue pattern right dead center of every one of those stars.
Yeah, when they did the stitching on it, they're much more depressed on this one than this flag is.
Like when you blow that right up on my screen, like I'm looking at it on a 4K monitor, and I see tiny little blue dots in the center of every one of those stars.
Right
See?
there and there and there. That could be just because it's more wet and the stitching would have swelled up. Like these look like they're actually stitched differently. They do look a little different that way.
In the Lunar Surface Journal, is there any indication that the flag was touched by anybody after it had been placed in position originally?
No, as a matter of fact, I don't think they had an extra flag. There's no documentation that said they brought two flags with them. This isn't just an anomaly. This is just an error in simulation. When these guys left and went on the rover for that little EVA, come back, the set's been regroomed. It's very much drier, and it could probably be the next day when they were doing shooting, and they shot it at a later time on Earth, so the sun is very much higher in the sky. Those little anomalies like that tend to stand out. And once again here, just to show on both of these that they're shot from the same direction. Slightly different angle, just over here shooting in, but it's both the same direction out. You can see it here, even at a distance. You can see that the way the flag was folded is exactly, they started on the other side when it started to be folded up. The tire tracks and that huge long shadow, no shadow on this one. Absolutely amazing that could happen to go out on an EVA. This problem they had with the rain, you can see how much drier it is even back here. When you get to the Kubrick line, their background matting effect was supposed to match. And of course, now it does in this one, right? It doesn't here because it got wet. That's simply on the set.
If it got wet, that means it was filmed here on Earth, because there's no rain on the moon, as we keep being told. There's no atmosphere on the moon, but there's plenty of movement of the sun. And there's plenty of movement of the sun on Earth, you know.
If they went out for a few hours on Earth shooting this and come back, the sun's going to be much higher and you're going to have a very short shadow length.
Yeah, that's what we see.
That's right. But they probably had to wait for the next day to do that shooting because the ground is so much more drier. It wouldn't have dried up that fast. One of the other things you're going to find in here, and this is just another nice little anomaly, and this is CERN, you know, just messing around, but they get to here. And here, you got to realize that the payload specialist wouldn't have had anything extra. This is a gigantic strap that goes on a crane, and you can see all the hooks on it. There's 4 straps that come out with hooks that go on up to and then bind into one single hook. That could easily be used to lift the rover around because it had the pin connections are here and here on each side where it mounted onto the LEM. Those little tiny cables are 1/16 inch aircraft cables that were on there to hold it in place. Why do you need a strap this big anywhere on the lunar surface if you're in 1/6 gravity? You could pick that rover up with 4 pieces of fishing line. You don't need a cable that size. And it's just something that's left out on the lunar set. And given the fact that they have 21 movie production studios, you have to realize that you're looking at a movie. What you will find also interesting in here is CERN is kicking. See all the dirt that's being splashed up right here? That's an action shot where he's kicking the mud off his boots on the rover. I mean, they just beat the hell out of these things anyway. That's the biggest part of it. But these type of things, you just cannot ignore. You can't say that this happened on the lunar surface. Even when you look at these photographs in here, when you're going through, you can just see how wet they are. You can see how much moisture is tucked down into here and soaking up on the rocks. They're absolutely wet in these photographs. This is a good one, though. It just shows the difference. That the background set, that they designed it and matched the color for the surface that they were working with, but when it gets rained on, it gets darker.
Yeah, it does. Much darker and much more pronounced tire tracks and footprints.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like these guys are just covered. Look at them, just covered in mud in those photographs, right? When you go through, when they're doing the flag here, and there's Cernan, and somebody must have put a bunch of mud right up on his shoulder here. You know, these guys are just messing around. They're grabbing mud and putting it on each other, right? That's how crazy they are. And of course, you always notice they never have a camera with them.
I like that.
Yeah, they just never bothered to have the camera. These shots down here, you can just see how wet that dirt is. It's almost muddy right here, all of the stuff down. And he's absolutely covered in mud. And that's not just dust on them. That's mud. And then, of course, always have to come back and show that beautiful wet flag. And now you can see that all the mud has been wiped off of them. It's actually wet. You can see it. They're washed off. Even the cue card's got water on it.
Lack of continuity here. There's no continuity assistant on the set to make sure that everything matched the previous shot.
Yeah. But now take a look at Cernan again. You get to the next shot. It almost looks like he's got a brand new backpack on, doesn't it? Like, where's all that mud on Cernan? He must have wrecked his backpack. All the mud that was down into his crotch and everything else that was here is all gone. Still on his legs. They might have cleaned him off really good. I don't think so. None on the shoulder. Still no camera. But just all the muddy shots, everything else. These kind of things we look at, we see them. Once you see them, there's no way not to see them.
True. Yep. That's a good point.
And if that upsets people, that we're pointing these things out, that we're showing you exactly how they staged these things, that the errors that they had in simulation. And when people say, oh, they couldn't fake it, they're exactly right. They couldn't fake it. They were dealing with Earth's atmosphere. They were dealing with rain. They were dealing with all kinds of weather. They're dealing with the fact that the sun is going to change and give you different shadow lengths in the pictures that you're shooting, dramatically different. All of those images are on one magazine. But when people say there's no way they could fake it, they didn't have the technology, you're absolutely right, they couldn't. But they still filmed it anyway.
If they say it often enough, this is filmed on the moon, we're going to believe it because we want to believe it.
Yeah.
What we did at the time, we thought this wonderful event created and carried out by NASA and the 400,000 technicians who were involved. There were 400,000 people. They were doing the best job they could. They didn't know they were part of some spurious event, and they haven't spoken out about it. They haven't said, well, I agree with you. These things are not compatible with what we're told happened. Because on the moon, it takes 14 days for the sun to go from horizon to horizon, a very small period of time for the shadows to change. And if you're going to do it in a day, on the moon, there won't be very much change in shadow positions. There can't be, but there will be on Earth. A 12-hour difference on that one, 5-hour difference on Earth is quite significant. The sun angle will be very different. On the moon, it will be almost unnoticeable. So, NASA, come on, tell us how you did it. It's time that you got honest with us. It's time that you told us what you were trying to achieve. We know what it was, but we'd like to hear it from you.
When it comes to the number of people that might have been involved in actually filming that, they just could have said, oh, we're just practicing. All those people would have believed that it was just a practice session, full dress practice session, because it was 30 years later before these photographs actually showed up.
That's right. That's a good point.
The very few shots what, a couple of dozen for each of the missions were the only ones that were released. The rest of these photographs didn't get released, so you couldn't compare them like the way we can do now until the 30th anniversary. So all those people are dead. They don't work for NASA. You're already into second generation or even third generation people working for NASA at that point in time. So nobody would be able to actually identify them that were there. They could have just figured that they were working on a practice set with the astronauts on any of their practice sets, whether it's an indoor set or an outdoor set or whatever, right?
Yep. And of course, if you're working at NASA today, you're not going to come out and say these things because you're disputing NASA's history, and that couldn't be permitted. So nobody at NASA today is going to front up and say, these guys have got a point, you know, let's have a look at it. They're not going to say that. They're going to say, what NASA showed us for the Apollo 17 missions, the last mission to land on the moon, we're told, is true, it's real. Yeah, the record stands, and we've deconstructed it. And you've pointed out significant errors in the continuity of the photographs. It's no conspiracy. You just look at the shadow on the bell housing, for instance. Completely different. And yet, in the time period we're told it was taken, on EVA-1, there shouldn't have been any difference in shadows on the bell housing. It should be the same from beginning to end.
No, that was a very, very short EVA they went out on and came back on. Even if they were out there for 2 hours or whatever, considering that they had a maximum of 7+ hours that they were on the lunar surface on an EVA. They had to set all that equipment up. They had to set the rover up on the first EVA. They had to set the flag up. Then they had to do all those photographs. They go on the EVA and then they come back and they do all this other stuff. There's only a few hours difference, and that shadow change is just incredible.
The total EVAs on Apollo 17, I think, was about 20 hours altogether.
Just under 24 hours total for the EVAs. They were all over 7 hours out. Some of them were closer to 8.
And how far did that rover travel in total?
56 kilometers, I think, total.
Would the batteries have lasted that long without being charged?
The documents they claim for Apollo 17, I think, they still had about 10% reserve. So like it was like it would travel 65 kilometers and they went 10 kilometers less than that. Could have been 65 miles because it's the US. It should be in miles.
Yeah, it should be in miles.
They keep mixing it up one over the other. It doesn't matter how they do it, but they claim that the batteries still had about 10% life left in them when they finished off the EVA.
Well, they have to, really, don't they? Has battery life got better since then?
Dramatically. Don't forget they're running the TV camera off those and everything else, right?
Yeah, and all the communication systems, all being run off the batteries.
Yeah, like there is another battery pack for the television camera, but that would have lasted maybe 15 minutes at most.
Yeah, they're magic batteries, aren't they? There's a lot of magic on Apollo 17. Well, all Apollo missions. But it's more obvious on Apollo 17 when you start deconstructing the time that they spent on the surface, the amount of EVAs that they were doing.
Well, they were grandstanding.
Yeah, of course they were.
It's exactly what they were doing. They were just simply grandstanding. They had to make it bigger and better and have more activities going on for each of the missions. They just progressively went there. Oh, we can travel farther. We can do more stuff. We can bring back more rocks, everything else.
Yeah, which they did. Well, they told us they did. And maybe the rocks were more than the previous missions. Like 240 pounds of rocks on Apollo 17. That's more than a person would weigh. I hope they did all the adjustments for the takeoff of the lunar module.
Wasn't that kilogram?
It was 342 kilograms of rocks, which was in total about 840 pounds of rock.
Right. And then they had all those extra experiments that they brought out there and did.
Yep. Yeah.
You can't find any footage on.
No.
You see the pieces of stuff on the ground. The props are out on the ground, but they weren't actually using them. All of a sudden appeared. They're out on an EVA. They come back and they're already all set up for them.
had the set builders at work, making sure they got everything in place, but the continuity girls weren't around to make sure that they were in the right place at the right time. That's what continuity is about. When you do different shots in a film, you have to ensure that the scene is set correctly from the previous scene.
What we can't identify, absolutely can't identify, is how many rolls of film they used. And the ones that they're displaying now is how many photographs were inserted in. Because Apollo 17, they list 6 magazines with no images on them. They're not available to download any of the images. But once you bring them in and scan them into a computer, you can simply replace the image with another image. So they could have used many more magazines when they're out there shooting with other people and said, oh, here's a better shot. Let's put this one in. Let's put that one in, right? Mix and match them and put them all on one magazine.
That's almost certainly what happened. The magazines are reconstructions to fit the timeline and to fit the activities that we're told happened. Because the original film, the film that was in the camera, we're told, is in storage at the Johnson Space Center and has never been seen because the originals are so precious they can't be handled. Climate-controlled environments.
That's why they put them up on March to the Moon, showing them on the film, to show that they are in sequence, that they haven't been messed with. That's why they did that. They can reproduce that anyway because we can see that those frames are just dropped in there.
Yeah. Any photographer looking at a roll of film can tell you exactly what the photographer was attempting to achieve with that roll of film, because it builds up to a particular sequence. Most of the Apollo films are almost random in what they show. Different scenes, different activities, different sun angles. It's like they're selections of films to tell a story that NASA wants us to understand. But if you deconstruct what are on those films, it's very different from what we're told happened. So they're basically fraud. They're a fraud trying to sell us a story. It's sad, very sad.
The thing when you hire a crew of people to put it online, like Kip Teague and the team that he had to do it, those people didn't really understand what was actually in the photographs. They were technicians to get those images onto a drum scanner, scan them into a computer, and design a web page to put them up.
Yeah.
They weren't looking at the contents, what was in the photographs. And that's why you can find so many anomalies within the photographs.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. And that's where you find them. Yes, the original photographs were scanned in to create a sequence that was plausible from what we're told supposedly happened. But of course, if nobody had been onto the moon in the first place, the whole thing was fraud. The whole thing was a fabrication. Mistakes are going to be made and mistakes will be identified. If we take the emotion out of the subject, because it was an emotional story and it was deliberately designed to be emotional so that we would be captured by it, we would be entrapped by it, and we were. I mean, I believed when I first saw those pictures that they were for real. I had no reason not to believe it. Now we look at them, we think, hang on, there's something wrong here, and there's something wrong there, and there's something wrong there. And then you start to see that the whole story of Apollo landing on the moon was a fabricated event for political reasons, which we now know about. And look at how hard it is to get back to the moon. I mean, look what the Artemis program went through just to get the rocket off the ground, let alone into orbit around the moon.
If you start to look at any of the latest attempts to launch anything off the ground, it doesn't look like they're progressing forward. It looks like they're going backwards, which means the stuff they had before didn't work. They're trying new stuff. It doesn't work. They're at a standstill. Doesn't matter who it is either. These are the best scientists in the world that are working on this stuff. They're trying to change engine designs. They're trying to get more power out of them. They're trying to get more efficiency out of the fuel so they don't have to carry so much weight. But I think the bottom line is when it comes to rocket design, a liquid-fueled any engine, the weight penalty for using that type of technology is causing a huge problem.
Another thing that's causing a huge problem is how NASA reinvented the wheel. And what they're doing is they're putting these new wheels on these Mars missions, so they say, and they have a problem. They were going to use rubber, except that rubber will not function, so they say. Now, this Veritasium article here that we were looking at,
They absolutely showed us right off the top that if you put a inflated tire wheel on a machine out there, the vacuum is going to blow it right off the rim. They admit it outright.
not only do they admit that, but the reason why that they weren't going to do it is because rubber shatters. And here we're going to see it, right? So what he's doing is he's putting the rubber into that nitrogen and then hitting it with a hammer. And he's saying that this is exactly what would happen on the moon.
Yeah, of course it would. Rubber works very well here on Earth in the pressure that we have here on Earth, but in the vacuum of the moon, totally different. The science is completely different.
Don't forget, Apollo 14 had a cart with rubber tires on it.
Yeah, it did. Yeah.
And that thing was fully in the shade on the outside of the craft, all the way there. It's showing the memory of the wire here on it. Those would be great. Absolutely work beautiful for bicycle tires. You never get a flat.
But this is the reason why they are using this type of a mesh on these tires, because they cannot use rubber.
Yeah.
And this is talking about Mars. The first thing they do is they talk about Mars. And then they take this bicycle here and they're showing you the rubber inner tube of it. And then they're going to take the rubber inner tube out and they're going to show you what happens when you dip it into liquid nitrogen. And then he hits it with a hammer. And then he says this is what would happen to rubber if it was subjected to the moon's environment. So what's going on here? Either it works or it doesn't. Like you said, Apollo 14, was it the cart?
Just a Goodyear rubber tire.
Yeah, and then so is this. Well, this is rubber.
That car that Musk launched to Mars, his Tesla, which had rubber tires, it's not going to work when it gets to Mars.
He said that he didn't even make any adjustments to the car whatsoever, so the normal inflation on the car tires, they would have blown off by the time they were 100 miles off the surface of the Earth.
But now you know what's going to happen is that the NASA proponents are going to say, oh yeah, well he dipped it in liquid nitrogen, of course it's going to shatter. But those are the temperatures you're going to find on the lunar surface. Well, then they're going to say, well, the lunar surface doesn't have any temperature.
Yeah, I know. Now, watch this. They're showing the degradation of actually these tires that they're showing right here, that they're breaking down on the Mars surface. Except they also have an example of the same tire with the same problems here on Earth. I don't know how they recreated it, because first they show it on the Mars rover and then they actually got the tire, they're holding onto the tire here on Earth. See that? He's showing that off there, and I like how they do that. And then they got another tire on the set that they have that looks exactly the same as that.
Oh yeah, but he took a photograph. This is taking a selfie with a hole in the tire. But it is showing you what's left of those tires on that rover if it's supposed to be there.
But this is interesting about this material. It's been out apparently since the 60s. They did not have this memory wire developed. It wasn't on the rover or anything else. They're only just figuring out how to use it now. You heat it up and cool it down. You can stretch it out, or you cool it down and it goes back into its shape. And now they're actually showing the shots of the Apollo rover tire, right? But it did not have this type of material. They did claim it was developed at that time. And they still have the same problem. You can't run these things at speed because they're just going to act like sieves. Like they're designed to go like 1 mile an hour or whatever when they're crawling. He's going to show you how much they can lift when they go back into their memory, how much they can pull. So they can be used in lots of applications.
Interesting film, that.
That's the strange thing, is that Apollo 14 on the cart had rubber tires on it. According to these guys, you can't have rubber tires on the moon or on Mars because they are going to shatter into pieces as soon as it hits a rock or anything. If it runs over anything, it shatters.
You imagine Apollo 14, they bring the cart down, they just kind of drop it down onto the surface, and the tires would have shattered because it just spent 3 days in the total shade, and it's much colder on the way there. When you're off the lunar surface, right, you're getting down well over 200 degrees.
That's the temperature at which rubber shatters. And of course, don't forget, on the way to Mars, it's been in a vacuum of space the whole way. And that's weakened it as well, because vacuum has that effect on material, as Bill has demonstrated.